each of the council members here for today's agenda review session.
All right. So we are going to start with the Finance Committee, introductory number 246, establishing a city policy for paid leave for victims of domestic violence. Any questions on 246? Okay, moving on to 247. This is a council item that was submitted, which is an amendatory agreement with Emery, Shelley, Brinkerhoff, and Abity, LLP for legal services related to the PAB. Any questions on this item?
This doesn't show as an amendment, DJ.
Sorry?
Oh, yeah, it does. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Introductory number 287, an agreement with WXXI to broadcast city council meetings. Any questions on 287?
For some reason, I don't have that in my packet.
I don't have that in my packet as well.
This was a tweener, so it came a little bit later.
It came through email on July 6th.
Katie,
Oh,
would you be
okay.
able to access it and bring up those items so people can see them?
Sadly, I don't think I have any of the tweeners in my binder.
So they're all in finance and they are all one after another. So there's 4 of them. And
So what day was they sent?
July 6th, came through on July 6th.
Okay.
So you should have it on your email from July 6th.
Is it showing okay?
yes,
Okay.
and 2 of them are from the clerk's office for contracts. So that is this one for WXXI. And then the next one is 288, which is for the publication of the city charter and code.
Yeah.
289 is an amendatory agreement for expert witness services from the law department. Josanne, I think this one is pretty standard, correct?
Yes, it is. Yep.
Well, all 3 of these are certainly XXI and the one for code, because we've been doing them forever. In fact, I indicated to Hazel that on the next renewal, we need to do an RFP, even though I don't believe anybody can beat their price. But just as a matter of checking the market, we need to do an RFP on the one for the code for the next renewal.
So introductories number 290 through 292 are budget technical amendments and charter and code changes. So if folks have questions on these, if you haven't had a chance to look at them yet, maybe if you could send them to me by tomorrow afternoon so that I can get them to the administration tomorrow. But there's only the 4 tweeners, and we can make sure that they get resent out at the end of this meeting too. All right, any other questions? Or since there's no questions on that, we're going to move on to NBD. And these you should all have with your original packet. The first is introductory number 248, a lease agreement for UGI Energy Services LLC for 1000 North River Street Port Terminal Building. Any questions on that?
I have a question. I guess the question is, how does UGI's scope of service connect to the city's climate action plan?
Any other questions? Then we'll move on to 249, which is a lease agreement with Buckingham Properties for Buckingham Commons Building in the Office of Public Integrity meeting space or office space. Any questions on 249?
Yeah, why does OPI, or how many staff does OPI have? And what's the justification for the amount of space they occupy?
My questions are, it's
I think I read that they're moving to a different space within the same building and wondering what the rationale for that is. And they've given us what the yearly rent will be, but also note that electricity is the responsibility of the city. So just wondering what that cost has been.
Any other questions on 250?
Yes, my question is there a reason we can't just, why do we rent? I guess that's my big question. What is the reason for renting instead of relocating them into a building that we own already?
We can ask the question, but just as a matter of information, we always use our facilities as a first choice when that is available. So anytime we're renting something, it means that we don't have an appropriate location or an available location for that service. We are, even at this time, even as we look for a location for the PAB, we'll of course look at everything we own, and we're looking at the new Dries location on St. Paul Street for that. So rental is never the first option for us.
I also think, Councilmember Pio, that we've heard in the past that this location is, since an OPI, ooh, I'm hearing feedback. Sorry.
Somebody's got their YouTube on.
Yeah. So I think that since OPI has a sort of privacy element, they don't want it to be located with other departments in case there are people going to make complaints or something. So I think that that is part of the reason why OPI is in that building, but we'll definitely make sure we ask the question.
Yeah, that's correct, BJ. That is the primary reason why they were located there.
But he didn't ask why they were located there. He asked why we rent instead of
Rent.
using our own facilities.
Yeah, I think that was the reason though, but yeah, he should have, that they didn't want to rent. They didn't want to be in a city-owned facility.
It wouldn't have mattered if it was city-owned, if it
I agree.
was someplace away.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I hear you.
Okay. Are there any other questions on 250? If not, we'd move to 251, which is a technical amendment for ordinance number 2020-99, acquisition of properties for the Flower City School number 54 campus modernization project.
BJ,
We skipped 250.
You skipped, that was 249 you just did.
Oh, in fact, I did. So sorry, that would be 250, a lease agreement with the Charles Settlement House, Inc. for 71 Parkway for the Northwest Neighborhood Service Center. Any questions on that?
Oh, I know Jose is thinking about it.
I'm looking at the numbers. I know that we're going to put 10 million into a new building, correct? For the Northwest Service Center with the police station.
There is a new building, yes.
Yeah, so I mean, doing the math, that's like 270 years of rent. So if it's $10 million, that's I'm just looking at the numbers at this point. That's 270 years of rent at $37,000 a year. I would love to see the rationale behind building a whole new building versus renting in this case.
So what is your specific question? I want to make sure I phrase it correctly.
My biggest thing, I guess, at this point would be, when do we see the return on our investment? If we're spending $10 million for a new building, but we spend $37,000 a year on rent.
So are you suggesting, Jose, that you want the neighborhood service center to stay at the Charles Settlement House building? Is that what you're, is that a more?
I'm just, at this point, we are looking at everything with a fine tooth comb for how we can not spend as much money because we have a huge deficit. So at what point should we look at certain things and say, you know, where can we cut some costs? And at this point, this is, yes, we need a new building. I'm just saying in future wise, if we're looking at new buildings versus just renting, maybe we should continue renting just for the savings of the cost. So it's not really a question.
Okay.
Is it a question, Jose?
No, because I believe in a new building,
Okay.
but for this
Okay.
one, for future wise, reallocating or remodeling, moving, we're going to be looking at funds and how do we disseminate them in the best way to save money, because we're just completely over budget. That's all I'm thinking about is the finance part of it. So no real question. Sorry, wasting time.
But we're not over budget, by the way. We're not over budget. Our budget's balanced.
Sorry, yes, our budget is balanced. We are not like.
Important point. Okay.
Okay, so introductory number 251 is a technical amendment for ordinance number 2020-99 for the acquisition of properties for the Flower City School number 54 campus modernization project. Councilmember Patterson has asked, is this now officially a done deal? And how long does the owner have before she has to move out of the property? Does anyone else have any questions?
Yes, my question would be, how are we helping them with moving costs? Like how much are we spending in moving costs, or is it included in that 65,000? And can we allow them to reuse the first-time homebuyer grant since we took the house from them essentially?
My question is, when they agreed to this, it was pre-COVID, and just wondering if they've been reached out to since this all happened, and if that's creates any challenges.
Any other questions? So introductory number 252 is an agreement with Home Leasing LLC for North Clinton, East Main, Culver Road rental housing project. Any questions on 252?
Question on this one as well. It says principal and deferred interest due at the end of the 30-year term. So is that going to be the first time we see an actual payment from this in 30 years?
Yeah, I was confused by that too, because it does say an interest-only loan, but then it says the interest is deferred. So I guess clarification around that. My other question is kind of around all loans of this type where we kind of defer to a balloon payment at the end. When it's time for them to pay that balloon payment, do we ever raise or do we ever waive that? Because that's something that I've heard brought up before. And if it was waived, is that something that gets done through City Council?
Any other questions on 252?
Yes, I have two questions, BJ. The first one is based on the requirements and restrictions of the overall funding. What is the what are the restrictions for raising rent? Or is that rent range that they provided going to remain consistent for the entirety of the loan? And the second question is just, I'd like an explanation or maybe a definition of what a cash flow dependent loan with principal. I mean, I understand what a cash flow dependent loan is.
Oh, sorry.
But I have not seen that language used for these types of, for this type of legislation before.
So you would like to know the definition of a cash flow dependent loan?
I'd like to know what specifically what they mean by cash flow dependent loan in this case.
Any other questions on 252?
Yeah, I'm gonna follow up on the deferred interest one. If it's not deferred and it is being paid, what do those payments look like when it's 3/4 full versus the entire place is full, because it's based on cash flow dependent. So I would like to know what the payments would look like, please, if it's not deferred.
Any other questions on 252? Move on to 253. In agreement with Charlotte Harbor Townhomes for a pilot agreement. Any questions on 253?
Yes, definitely. I see that there is a tax exemption already in place due to renovations that were done. I've heard from people that it's in need of new renovations. So can we require new renovations in order to get the existing tax exemption to be transferred over? Can we require some type of investment into the buildings themselves? As well as I would like to know what the renovations that were completed in 2005 were, because I've heard from people that they were just paint.
Kind of on that same thread, you know, I've heard that property management isn't done very well and they're keeping the same property managers. And so as part of this agreement, is it ever done, or could it be done to kind of, you know, use the lever of the pilot to get them to, you know, hire better property managers? Or is there anything that we could do to alter that arrangement that they have to get the people some better property managers? If that makes sense.
Could you just rephrase that one more time? I was still finishing one of Councilmember Pio's questions. So.
Sure, sorry. I want to know, like, do we have any levers to get them to change the property management company? Because I think Councilmember Pio, you said too that you've heard that they haven't been very responsive.
Right. The most amount of calls for police have come out of this specific area, and it's not outside calling police. It's the neighbors inside of those apartments calling police. So this is we need new management. Renovations not being done, and it's just a not strong area for the community.
Loretta, you're on mute if you're speaking to us.
Okay, here we go. So just for the sake of curiosity, what does the fact of tenants calling the police have to do with the property management?
Well, it'd be similar to if in this neighborhood we had a house that we constantly had to call police on, and the landlord was not there, or the property managers were not taking care of the house, we would have issues. In this case, this property management has a history of not taking care of the issues that the residents have. So maybe we need a new management company.
Okay.
And we're giving them tax exemptions. We should have some type of power over that, I would think.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I'm concerned that they're not doing the upkeep that they need to make the place habitable.
Yeah, that would be more of a concern for me in terms of their actual management and maintenance and that kind of thing. Unless we're saying they're not doing a good job of selecting tenants, which is resulting in phone calls. So I couldn't tie those two concepts together. Okay.
BJ, can I just ask that at the very bottom of the page, the last sentence talks about how the transfer was necessary in 2015 to be able to obtain project-based Section 8. I don't see a very specific justification for why this transfer needs to happen right now. I mean, there's certainly some language around it, but I'd like a question specifically asked, why does this transfer need to happen right now?
Any other questions on this item? So we would move on to 254, which is an agreement with Rochester Careers in Construction for Project Phoenix. Any questions on this?
I have a question, but I'm not exactly sure how to word it. Because this is for Project Phoenix, which I think is great, but it goes through Rochester Careers in Construction. So I'm just kind of wondering, like, what's the relationship? Like, what actually are we funding through our CCI? Like, what am I trying to say? Like, what will our CCI be doing to facilitate a benefit for Project Phoenix? Does that make sense?
I think so. I think that, I'm not certain, but I think that it may be a program of RCCI.
I mean, it's not currently.
Isn't it?
Is it?
I know when we've done council member items in the past, Rochester
It
Careers
is,
in
okay.
Construction was the organization.
Got it. Okay. I just wasn't connecting those two, so don't ask the question. I'm good.
Okay. Any other questions on 254?
What is the $50,000 going for specific? I understand it's for materials and supplies, but for what construction purposes? What projects are they working on?
Anything else on 254? Hearing none, we'll move to 255, an amendatory agreement for an amendatory intermunicipal agreement with Monroe County for lead paint poisoning prevention inspection services. Any questions on 254? I'm sorry, 255. Hearing none, we'll move on to PPW. The first item in PPW is introductory number 256, a professional services agreement for food waste prevention, donation, and organics recycling, education, and outreach program. Any questions on 256?
This is a new program? Is this new?
Yes. Yes.
This is something that you were working on, Mitch, right? Is
Yep.
this actually municipal composting? Or is it like outreach and education on how folks can do it at home?
Kind of both. I mean, we're going to be working, the whole feasibility plan isn't done yet, but this is to start the communications engine going around doing food grade composting.
That's really exciting.
Any questions on 257, the next item, an agreement with Bergman Associates, architects, engineers, landscape architects, and surveyors for the Blue Cross Arena Riverside Edition.
Josanne, is the amendment coming for this?
Hey, Moretti, you should have it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So just there was an info and amendment because the RFP has a compensation amount of $800,000. It should be 300,000, like the transmittal.
So it was just an information item, right? Not an amendment?
Yes, it was. Yep.
I
I
have a
believe
question.
Joe sent that out. I want to say Tuesday, I think.
Yeah, it's dated June. Yeah, well, actually, it's dated June 7th, but probably should be dated July 7th.
Can we go back just a minute to the to 256?
Certainly.
What is the anticipated product at the end of this contract?
Any other questions on 256 or 257? Moving on to 258, which is an agreement for 965 Maple Street renovation and DES Forestry
Actually,
Division.
I had a question on 257. With COVID and the state tightening their budget, is there any danger that we would not get reimbursed for Rock the River Way funding?
Anything else on 257? Then 258, the 965 Maple Street renovation, DES Forestry Division relocation. Any questions on that?
Is this the house that we agreed for them to be able to purchase? 965 Maple Street?
It was a home.
Right, so I feel $90,000 is extremely exorbitant amount for architecture and engineering services. So what does that actually entail? What are they going to do for $90,000? We might as well just build a whole new house.
Was it that they were knocking down the house and adding onto the building? I don't know if
Yeah.
anybody knows.
Yes, it's all part of a lot of different moving pieces, but I think those are the right questions to ask, and I'm sure that you'll get good answers.
Okay. Introductory number 259, move management services. Any questions on 259?
I'm wondering how much do we spend on these moving services in a year? And when would we use moving services instead of our own staff?
Any other questions? Introductory number 260, an agreement with TY Lin International Engineering and Architecture, PC, for parking garage evaluation and repair program. Any questions on 260?
I just want to know, is this something we do every year or every few years?
It's mandatory from New York State. I just learned this as well. I think it's required to do that, but yes, it's a good question.
Every year?
I forget if it's every year, if it's every other year. It's a good question.
Okay. And would that be required if we sold the garage, or is this just because it's owned by municipal government?
Okay. Any other questions on that item? Moving on to 261, civil engineering for civil engineering professional term service agreements. Any questions on 261? Introductory number 262, an agreement with CSX Transportation Inc. for design services, preventive maintenance for Northwest Group 12 Driving Park, CSX Railroad to Finch Street, Emerson Street, Mount Read Boulevard to Sherman Street, and J Street from Mount Read Boulevard to CSX Railroad. Any questions on 262?
This is a completely ignorant state or question. So if you have the answer, please let me know. Why do we pay them at all? Can't we just require them to update it? I mean, if it's needed, why do we pay CSX to update it?
CSX is They own all the property. I mean, again, it's a good question to ask. I'm not going to pretend I know all the answers, but they own all of the right of ways on the railroad tracks. And if you ask me, they are a racket who make way too much money off of municipalities around the country for this stuff.
That's a good answer.
We could not pay them, but then they probably won't do it either. It's like, for them, it looks all right to me.
Yeah. I didn't know if we could just require it and say this is what needs to happen and not pay them. I don't know.
Their property.
Right, but we got codes on, you know, houses that people got to keep them up, so worth asking.
Okay. Any questions on 263, 264, East Main Street Improvement Project? All right, 265. Geometric changes for 275 East Avenue, Interloop Site 3. Any questions on 265?
Yes, my question would be, how was the meeting advertised? Because no one showed up to it, and we pay them good money to make sure people do, or try.
Okay. Anything else on 265? Then 266, 267, West River Wall Project. Any questions on those items? Hearing none. Move on to 268, the last item in Parks and Public Works, Structural Term Engineering Services. Any questions on 268? We'll move into Public Safety, Youth, and Recreation. The first item is 269. It's an appropriation of federal forfeiture funds for Crime Stoppers. Any questions on 269?
I have a lot of questions in this section, so just giving you a heads up. Do we have data on the effectiveness of Crime Stoppers? What will the $15,000 go to support? And do we have an idea of how much that $15,000 is in their total budget?
What was that question again, Mary? How much is the 15,000 what?
How much of a percentage is 15,000 of their total budget?
Oh, okay.
Any other questions on 269?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's similar to what Mary asked, but I'll just maybe phrase it in a different way. I'd like the administration to provide any relevant data or statistics about the efficiency of Crime Stoppers and including a trajectory of how effective it has been in the last 3 years.
Okay, any other questions on 269? All right. Introductory number two.
Before you go, I wonder, I think this pays for flyers and all that stuff, but do we get to pay rewards out of the federal forfeiture money? And if so, wouldn't that be, because 15,000 is not much money. So, and I don't often see us offering rewards. So is that something that's doable out of this or associated with this project?
Yes, Crime Stoppers does pay awards, a significant amount of awards actually
out of
yearly.
15,000?
Not out of the 15,000. I think the 15,000 goes mostly to billboards, marketing. They have a website. There's materials that they use where people can call Crime Stopper. I think majority of that, because of the strict restrictions on forfeiture funds.
Mm.
I think they go specifically to a lot of it towards the marketing of Crime Stoppers.
So we're not permitted to pay rewards out of the forfeiture funds?
I don't
Out
believe
of the-
that. I don't believe that. I could be mistaken. It's a good question to
Okay.
ask, of course,
Okay,
but I don't believe that that money is necessarily used to pay rewards. But
No.
I could be mistaken.
no, and the
It's not-
question is, are we able to, are we permitted to? Even if
I don't
we're
know the
not
answer to
doing
that.
it, are we permitted to? So if we can
That's a good
find that
question.
out. Mhm.
Any other
Um,
questions on 269?
Yeah, the flyer that they put out, you know, it has mugshots of people and their crimes, but I noticed that some of them are like parole violations and kind of low level things. And just wondering like what criteria did they use to select who gets put on the flyers?
$270, an amendment for ordinance number 2020-152. Any questions on this?
Yeah, I got questions.
Okay.
So, how do I word this? The amount is being increased for traffic control and crowd control for the next school year, but you know that we don't even know if there will be school next year. So I guess why justification for the increase? And I know like this is coming from the school district and this is just to receive reimbursement, but if we can get the answers, that would be helpful. Is this something required by the police contract? And again, like I know that this is their item, but just wondering if we have data, if there are other school districts in the county that have a police presence, or is this just something done in the city?
But you recognize that it's the school district that's paying this because they want the city to provide the service.
Right.
So then it's not a matter of the police contract. It's that we're paying for a service that somebody's purchasing.
That the
Okay.
school district is asking for. So you need to ask those questions
Right.
to the school district.
Right, I just didn't know, because I know like some special events are required, like the police presence is required, so I didn't know if this is included. I was under the impression that it was part of the contract. I could have that wrong.
The school district regularly requests police officers from the city to provide the service, and they pay a fee to the city for those officers.
Okay,
And that's what this is.
Yeah.
I just didn't know if it was similar to special events like a parade where maybe, or not a parade, but a festival where they also pay for it, but I was under the impression that it's required, but I could have that wrong.
So you'd like to ask, is police presence a required service for these events?
Sure.
Because your question is, do they have to be there, or is it just that they're requesting to have them there?
Right.
Is that part of your question?
Right. Yes. Right. And then I guess this is kind of a general question that I'll go through some of the rest of them how does police overtime work? Because a lot of these items add money into the overtime budget. And so how does that, when money for these items goes into overtime, how does it get distributed? How does that work? And that doesn't sound like a well-worded question, but.
Do you want to send me a version of that question maybe a little bit later, or do you?
Sure. I mean, I guess I just want to know, like, when money goes into overtime, how does it go back out? How do we know it's allotted to these different, how do they keep track of it? Or is it just, like, how do we know it's not police working regular hours? You know what I mean? I'll try and work on it, I guess.
Okay,
I have a question, BJ.
go ahead, council member.
In the last 2 years, we have given Pathways to Peace contract for some similar work at special events for RCSD. I'd like to know what is the division of responsibilities? What falls to Pathways to Peace and what falls to RPD when the school district asks for these levels of additional support from city staff?
Any other questions on 270? Move on to 271, which is an agreement with the Department of Justice Coronavirus Emergency Supplemental Funding Program grant. Any questions on this? 272.
Sorry, I'm trying to wait to let people go ahead of me. I have questions on all of the,
271, I just want to know what, how our allocation was determined, how the city vouchers allocation was determined.
Go ahead, Councilmember Lupian.
yeah, kind of similar to what Mitch said. You know, what was the demonstrated need used to apply for the grant? Well, maybe that isn't connected, but what consists of preventing and responding to coronavirus in terms of the police? Can we get an itemized breakdown of what the 304,000 will be used for? For the N95 masks, does that, it says the fitting of N95 masks, does that also include the purchase of them? And how do I want to word this? You know, there've been a lot of reports that I've gotten from constituents about police not wearing masks. And so I'm wondering, I guess maybe if we're spending money to fit N95 masks, will they wear them? And in what circumstances will they wear them? So there's two different numbers I noticed. One is for the total funds distributed and one is the amount being amended in the budget. And wondering if there can be an explanation as to the different, why they're different.
Can you clarify what you're speaking about here?
Yeah, let me pull it up. So it says the total funds will be shared between the police department. They're getting 304,000. But then above it, it says amending the budget for the police department by 131,700. So I'm wondering why that's different.
Okay. as I'm looking at this, it says the receipt and use of 474,000 grant, and it looks like they're amending the police department and undistributed for a portion.
Right.
But
But
you
it
want
doesn't equal the 304 that they're getting in total. So I'm just wondering if there's an explanation for that. I am wondering if there is overtime involved in this work. I think I got it all.
I'm not quite done with this yet. Hold 1 second. And the last one was, is overtime covered by any of this funding?
Right.
Okay. Any other questions on 271? 272, an amendatory agreement with the law offices of Polano and Farrow PLLC for conflict counsel.
I have some questions. So just for clarification, if an officer is found to have sustained allegations, the city represents them?
Do you want to know under what circumstances conflict counsel would be used?
Yes, right. What circumstances constitute a conflict of interest? But in general, just to understand for my clarification, an RPD employee, the city of Rochester would pay to represent them if they were accused of police misconduct, whether it be through conflict counsel or our city staff. And who determines if there is a conflict of interest? And then my final question, how is the union involved in these proceedings?
Did you say union?
Yeah, the Locust Club, like how?
I thought you said, I wasn't sure if you said union or unit. I'm sorry.
Union, yeah. And I guess kind of similar to that, is this something that was negotiated in the contract, or is this something that is just how it gets done when something happens with an employee in the city?
Okay. Any
BJ,
other?
I'd like to just ask for an update on the negotiation with the Locust Club. A general update where we are at this point in the process.
As part of agenda review or just a separate question?
No, as part of agenda review, I mean, this item specifically mentions the collective bargaining agreement. So I'd like to just ask for a general update on where we are right now with the contract negotiation.
Any other questions? Move on to 273. federal forfeiture funds for seized vehicles. Any questions on 273?
Yes. At what point does the seizure occur? Is it when they are, does it happen before or after a conviction? And maybe the seizure isn't the right word. When does possession occur? In what circumstances would a seizure of a car happen? It says if the newly acquired vehicle is fleetworthy and in good condition, it'll go to replace older vehicles in the Special Investigations Unit. But what happens if it's not in good condition? What do Special Investigations use the cars for? And that's it.
Any other questions on 273?
What is the process for requesting funds from the Federal Forfeiture Justice Fund? Like, how does RPD, how do they ask for that money? Or how do we, yeah, what's the process there?
Okay. Any other questions? Moving on to 274, appropriation of forfeiture funds for granite operations. Any questions on 274?
Yeah, I'd like to understand why is this this is maybe a question Malik can answer if he's with us still. But why is this amending the budget? Granite has been something that the city has had in place for a long time. Why are these funds not just covering the cost of granite? Why is it adding funds to the RPD budget to do granite? Does that question make sense, BJ?
Yes, and I think the answer to that is the budget office is relatively conservative in their allocations, so they don't assume the recurrence of grants always, and so the amendment is to put that funding in once it's been guaranteed. And when you look at the budget, you'll see that the police department tends to have a significantly higher number of amendments for types of grants like this than other departments.
Sure, I understood, except this is not a grant. This is just using forfeiture funds. So that's money that we have some control over anyway. So I just don't understand why it's not incorporated as part of the budget versus adding as an amendment and in the first month of the budget.
BJ is somewhat right. Good question, of course, ask it, but this is not taxpayer dollars, number one. So make sure you understand that. This is RPD to the granted fund. It's a budgetary issue, a move out based on similar to what BJ was describing. It's kind of I don't want to say a budgeting trick or tool, but that they use yearly to recycle or to replace these funds based on the grants. But the chief told me when in our meeting that this was not none of this was taxpayer dollars.
So Vice President Whitefoot, is it because of the dollar amount fluctuates yearly, so they don't want to commit to a certain amount?
I'm gonna say we're gonna wait and get the answer from administration. I'm not a financial guy, but it's a financial budgetary tool that they use based on whether grant funding will be coming or not. So what BJ, how he described it, I believe is what our answer is going to be. But I'd rather the professionals to answer that question. But I'm just giving you what was told, that this is a yearly move out, if you will, from one fund to another based on whether the grant funding is there or not.
So Councilmember Gruber, I've put, why does this amend the budget and not just be incorporated as part of the budget when we use this funding annually?
Yeah, I would use the terminology, why does it not just cover existing costs? But yes, the concept is there. Thank you.
I guess I have questions about the effectiveness of Granite, if we have any data on that. What multi-jurisdictional intergovernmental agencies does Granite partner with?
I'm sorry.
It says multi-jurisdictional and then intergovernmental. So what other agencies does it partner with? I know it does list some of the Monroe County ones, but. What other funding did they receive, or is this the full portion of the funding needed to run the program? And it says we earn revenue on the federal forfeiture funds. So I'm wondering how that is. Are we selling things that we seize to earn the money, or how does that work? And then I have one more question on it.
So it's indicated that we earn revenue from federal forfeiture funds. And then you wanted to know how is that revenue gained?
Right. And my final question is, it talks about going after career criminals and mid and high level, kind of people, but are we catching kind of low level offenders to get information on the higher level ones? So are we, when it talks about career criminals, are we also catching up kind of lower level folks in it?
Okay. Any other questions on 274? 275, an agreement with New York State Division of Criminal Justice Services for the 2020-2021 GIVE grant. Any questions on that?
I have a question. I see in the transmittal that it says here that there's a $385,800 in overtime, does not pay the associated fringe cost of 122. Does that mean the city pays the 122,000? The difference? Just want that clarity. And just for clarity, are those two positions identified here from RIT? The community engagement and director, are those full-time positions?
The GIVE director and GIVE analyst?
Yes, thank you.
Sorry.
Actually, if you can add, yeah, the community engagement specialist as well, the communication specialist.
Okay. So are the GIVE director, GIVE analyst, and community engagement analyst full-time positions? And where are the fringe costs paid from?
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions on 275?
Yes. So the deterrence program, just wondering if there's details on that program. And then is there any data on the effectiveness of it? The next question is about the positions. Can we get the salaries for the positions? And the 34,000 that we give RIT, does that pay for all of the salaries, or is it a portion? Which I think we'll know if they give us the salary range. And then the justification.
1 second to catch up.
Let me know when you're ready.
I'm ready.
Okay. And what's the reason that we give the money to RIT to employ the give staff? Are there measured outcomes to show the successful performance of the give program? Maybe getting a comparison of when it was first implemented versus now in terms of the crime data?
Can you help me with that again? Sorry.
Yeah. So just wondering if they have data on outcomes or effectiveness of the give program.
I think you have asked that one.
That was the pass-through case manager. So it's like there's two different things going on here.
You said, are there any details on the deterrence program, not the give program? So is there any data on the effectiveness of the give program, and how have the results changed since it was implemented?
Yeah, in terms of it's firearm related crime, primarily shootings and homicides. So if there's any data on those. And my last question is, can we get a breakdown of expenses covered by the give program? And if they have, maybe the last year or two, if they don't have it for this year yet.
Okay. Any other questions on 275? Moving on to 276, which is an agreement for vehicle towing services. Any questions on 276?
If nobody else has any. What is the procedure for the recovery of the vehicles? What happens if someone can't pay the fines? If someone is unable to recover the car, what happens to it? What situations would the city tow an illegally parked car? It talks about towing for stolen vehicles, recovering of stolen vehicles. Do the owners of those vehicles have to pay to get them back? And finally, does this, it doesn't look like this contract has a dollar amount associated with it. So is this just to kind of designate these four as our towing agencies that we use?
I can answer that. That's the answer for that one.
Okay, thank you.
So, okay, so the next item is, let's see here, 270, are we on 277 or 278? 277, intermunicipal agreement for Genesee Community College veterinary technology student externships. Okay, 278, the receipt and use of funds from the United States Department of Homeland Security. Any questions on this?
I have a few.
Okay, go ahead.
Will the 9,500 be used for police overtime? How many man hours does this represent? What units or departments receive this money? And then how many times a year do we do a joint investigation with Homeland Security? That is my final question for the evening.
Any other questions on 278? 279, an agreement with Maddie's Fund, Pet Foster Care Stimulus Grant. Any questions on that? Uh, 280, fire apparatus bonding. Any questions on that?
Yeah, BJ, the last sentence is the Purchasing Bureau's surplus process. I'd just like to know what that is.
So what is the Purchasing Bureau's surplus process?
Amen.
Yeah, that's great.
Any other questions on 280? If not, we'll move to 281, which is an agreement for Personal Energy, Inc. Any questions on 281? (282) smoke and carbon monoxide detectors installation program. Any questions on 282?
How many, I had a question. How many residents did we serve last year for the program? Oh, I see it. Never mind.
283, an agreement with All Pro Catalysts LLC for the Youth Mentoring and Empowerment Initiative. Any questions on 283?
Just a plan for what they're going to do for COVID with 300 kids.
(284) an agreement for Rochester Recreational Swim Team. Any questions on 284? (285) appropriation and agreement for the International Plaza at La Marqueta. Any questions on 285?
Is this going to be a long-term agreement or is it just going to be annual?
Any other questions on 285? Last item of the night, 286, fire communication and alerting systems bonding. Any questions on 286?
Quick one, do we know what that system is that we are integrating into?
I'm sorry, can you clarify?
It says integrate into the forthcoming updated technical infrastructure of the emergency communication and learning system. What is it? A new system?
Yes, Monroe County is in the process of updating their CAD, computer aided dispatch system.
Yeah. Okay, that's what I need. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions that we may have missed, or anyone have anything?
Nice
If not,
job.
I believe we would be adjourned for this meeting. All right. So I will stop the stream and have a nice night, everyone.